One July morning, a young mother took her 2-year-old son for a normal morning walk in the Rocky Mountains. But neither of them ever came back home. Park rangers said they must have fallen, gotten lost, or had an accident. Yet, no bodies were ever found. No clues were ever discovered. Then, 6 years later, park researchers studying the heat inside a hot spring on the mountain found evidence so horrible it still troubles everyone who worked on the case. Mark Brennan sat at his desk at home, having a hard time focusing on the quarterly reports in front of him. The numbers all looked the same, and they didn't make sense no matter how many times he looked at them. 6 years. Almost 6 years had passed since Sarah and Ethan had disappeared on what should have been a simple day hike in the Rockies. His phone rang, the sharp noise cutting through his thoughts. He didn't know the number. It had a Colorado area code. His stomach felt tight as he answered. "Mr. Brennan, this is Detective Patricia Chen with the Park County Sheriff's Office. I need to speak with you about your wife and son's case." The coffee cup fell from Mark's hand, and brown liquid spread across the papers. After 6 years of dead ends and losing hope, no one called about Sarah and Ethan anymore. "What did you find?" His voice came out rough. "Mr. Brennan, I'd rather talk about this in person. Can you come to Colorado? We've found something that needs your immediate attention. Just tell me, please." Mark held the phone tighter. "Are they?" Detective Chen paused. "A research team studying geothermal activity found remains in a hot spring near the Cascade Trail system. We found items we believe belong to your wife." The room spun. Mark pressed his free hand flat on the desk to keep himself steady. "Both of them. You found both of them." "Sir, I really think it's best if we talk about the details when you arrive. Can you fly out today?" "I'm booking a flight now." Mark was already looking up airline websites on his laptop, his hands shaking as he typed. The hot spring. Which one? There are dozens in that area. Morning Glory Pool, about 2 miles off the main trail. Mr. Brennan, the research team that found what they found are environmental scientists from the University of Colorado. They were taking samples to study mineral deposits when their equipment picked up strange readings at the bottom of the spring. Mark's mind went back to that July morning 6 years ago. He had woken up with a fever and chills, probably from bad takeout they'd had the night before. Sarah had wanted to cancel the hike, but he had told them to go without him. Ethan had been so excited to see the bubble water, as he called the hot springs. He was 2 years old, steady on his little legs, and always wanted to explore. The items Mark managed to ask. What exactly did they find? Pieces of cloth that match hiking gear, a backpack frame, some leather that looks like it's from boots. Chen's professional tone couldn't hide the seriousness of what she wasn't saying. An organic material. "We'll need DNA to be sure, but given the location and the items found." "What about my son?" Mark cut in. "Ethan was only 2. Did you find anything that would show?" "That's what we need to talk about in person, Mr. Brennan. The forensics team is still working at the scene. The nature of hot springs makes getting things out tricky. The high heat and mineral content change how things are preserved in unique ways." Mark stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair. Through the window, he could see neighbors living their normal Tuesday morning lives, walking dogs, going to work. Their lives not touched by sudden tragedy. "I'll be on the 2:30 flight to Denver. Someone can pick me up at the airport. I'll meet you personally," Detective Chen promised. "Mr. Brennan, I know this is very hard. We're going to need you to look at some items to identify them. Are you ready for that?" "I've been waiting 6 years for answers," Mark said. "I'm ready for anything." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. How could anyone be ready to identify the remains of their wife? How could he be ready for the news that the lively, adventurous woman who had talked him into moving to Colorado for the hiking had died in a boiling pool of mineral-filled water? After the call, Mark moved like a robot through the house, putting clothes in a bag. In the hallway, he passed a wall of photos Sarah had insisted on making, dozens of pictures of their adventures. There was Ethan on Mark's shoulders at Garden of the Gods, Sarah laughing as she tried to put up their tent in a windstorm. The three of them at Morning Glory Pool just the summer before they disappeared, with Ethan pointing excitedly at the rainbow colors while held safely in Sarah's arms. Morning Glory Pool. They had been there several times, always careful to keep Ethan far from the edge. The water temperature was around 160 degrees. Sarah had read him the safety facts, how quickly a person's body would give in to such heat, how the minerals kept anything from ever fully breaking down, creating a kind of preserved record of tragedy. Mark made himself look away from the photos and focus on what he needed to do. Call his boss, book the flight, pack ID documents the detective would surely need. Call Sarah's sister in Portland. No, that could wait until he knew more. As he drove to the airport 2 hours later, Mark found himself thinking about the research team. What must it have been like, expecting to find mineral deposits and instead finding evidence of a 6-year-old tragedy? The detective had mentioned strange readings on their equipment, metal from the backpack frame and boot eyelets. Probably. Maybe the titanium wedding ring he had worked extra shifts to buy. The one Sarah never took off. The flight went by in a blur. Mark stared out the window as the mountains of Colorado came into view, the same peaks that had pulled Sarah to them like a magnet. She had grown up in Ohio, where the land was as flat as could be, and the mountains had woken up something inside her. Even after Ethan was born, she had insisted they keep up their hiking schedule, changing their routes for the baby carrier, always ready with supplies and emergency plans. Now, finally, he would have answers, or at least some of them. The question that bothered him the most, what had happened to Ethan, was left unsaid in Detective Chen's careful words. Hot springs preserved some things and destroyed others. What? Proof of a 2-year-old child could last for 6 years in boiling acidic water. As the plane came down toward Denver, Mark pressed his forehead against the window and tried to get ready for whatever was waiting for him in those mountains, where his family had disappeared. Detective Patricia Chen was waiting at the Denver airport arrivals area, looking just as professional as she sounded on the phone. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing, and she was wearing practical clothes for the mountains. She saw Mark right away, probably because of the tired sadness on his face. "Mr. Brennan," she said, holding out her hand, "I'm sorry we're meeting like this. My car is outside. It's about a 2-hour drive to the site." Mark followed her to an unmarked SUV, thankful that she didn't try to make small talk as they left the airport. The mountains stood ahead, the same peaks he had once found beautiful, now feeling heavy and threatening. Detective Chen finally spoke as they got onto Interstate 70. "The research team has been very helpful. Dr. Emily Reeves was in charge of the thermal study when they found it 3 days ago. They called us right away and haven't touched the site since." 3 days, Mark repeated. "You've known for 3 days?" "We needed to check certain details before we called you. The hot spring environment makes it very hard to recover evidence. We had to bring in special equipment and experts who understand geothermal forensics." Mark stared out at the passing land. "Have you found any sign of my son?" Chen's hands tightened a little on the steering wheel. "The recovery is still happening. This spring is deeper than we first thought, almost 40 feet in the center. We found several items from different depths, but it's a slow process. The water temperature and mineral content mean we can only send divers down for very short times." They drove in silence through the tourist towns of Idaho Springs and Georgetown, past the turnoff for Loveland Pass, where Mark and Sarah had gotten engaged 7 years ago. Every landmark held memories that were now spoiled by knowing how the story ended. The parking area for the Cascade Trail system was blocked off with yellow tape, with several police cars gathered near the start of the trail. Chen led Mark past the barriers, and other officers nodded seriously as they passed. The 2-mile hike to Morning Glory Pool had never felt longer. Mark heard the activity before he saw it. Voices, the hum of equipment, the organized mess of a major investigation. Then the trail turned, and Morning Glory Pool came into view. The hot spring looked just as it had during their family visits. A perfect circle of bright colors, yellows and greens coming from the deep blue center. But now, the peaceful natural wonder was surrounded by investigation equipment. A special diving platform had been built over one edge. Recovery teams in protective gear worked carefully around the edge. Mr. Brennan. Dr. Emily Reeves came up to them, her University of Colorado jacket stained with mud from days of work. "I'm so sorry. We were taking core samples of the bacterial mats when our magnetometer picked up metal at a deep level. The rules required us to check any strange readings that might affect our data." She led them to a temporary evidence tent set up 30 yards from the spring. Inside, tables held carefully labeled items that were being documented. Mark's legs felt weak as he walked to the first table. The backpack frame was easy to recognize, even with the rust. Sarah had bought that specific model after a lot of research, praising how well it distributed weight and how strong it was. The purple cloth pieces still stuck to parts of the aluminum told the rest of the story. "We believe the pack's metal. Frame is what our instruments detected," Dr. Reeves explained quietly. "The depth and position suggest it had been weighted down." Mark's mind struggled to understand what that meant. Weighted down. "You mean this wasn't an accident?" Detective Chen stepped forward. "That's one of the things we need to figure out. The spring's natural water flow could have moved items over. 6 years, but certain things about what we found are concerning." She guided him to another table. Sarah's hiking boots, or what was left of them. The leather had partly survived the harsh environment, enough to see the custom-made inserts she had for her high arches. Her car keys, the metal part, still had the dealership logo. And then, in a separate evidence bag, her wedding ring. Mark picked up the bag with shaking hands. The titanium had survived perfectly, and the writing on it was still clear. To the summit and back, M and S. He had had it engraved. With their private joke about getting through life's high and low points together. "The position of the items suggests your wife went into the spring fully clothed with all her gear," Chen said carefully. "That's very unusual for an accidental fall. Most people who accidentally fall into hot springs do so partly. A foot slips. They reach for something, they lean too far while taking pictures. Full immersion with a pack and boots." "Sarah knew these springs," Mark said, his voice empty. "She was obsessed with safety, especially with Ethan. She would never have gotten close enough to fall." "That's what we need to investigate," Chen replied. "There's something else. The research team's survey shows this spring has an unusual depth. Most hot springs in this area are pretty shallow, but Morning Glory has a narrow tube that goes down much deeper than the surface pool suggests. Items could be spread out at different depths." Mark understood what she was not saying directly. Different pieces of evidence, different remains, could be at different levels. The thought made him feel sick. "What about other hikers that day?" he asked. "The trail register, security cameras at the parking area. We're looking at everything from July 15th, 6 years ago," Chen assured him. "The trail register shows. Your wife signed in at 8:47 a.m., but Mr. Brennan, this trail system has dozens of connecting paths. Hundreds of people use it every day in the summer. After 6 years, tracking down possible witnesses." A shout from the diving platform cut her off. One of the recovery workers was signaling with urgency. Chen excused herself and jogged over. Leaving Mark standing among the evidence of his wife's last moments, he made himself study each item, trying to understand. Sarah's GPS watch, its electronic parts long dead, but the case was intact. Her water bottles, the insulated steel showing. Very little rust. Everything she had carried for a day hike with their toddler was now laid out like artifacts from the past. But where was the evidence of Ethan? No tiny boots, no straps from the child carrier Sarah wore. No sippy cup or snacks or any of the dozens of things she always packed for their son. The absence of these things felt louder than any discovery. Detective Chen came back, her face hard to read. Mr. Brennan, the dive team, has found more items at a deeper level. We're going to need to continue the recovery work, but I think we should get you to the hotel. This is going to be a long process. Did they find anything related to my son? Chen hesitated. Not for sure, but Mr. Brennan, the absence of certain evidence is important. If both your wife and son had gone into the spring, we would expect to find items from both. The fact that we're only finding items for an adult suggests. What? That perhaps your son wasn't with your wife when she went into the water, which opens up completely different questions about what happened that day. Mark felt a spark of something he hadn't let himself feel in 6 years. Hope, if Ethan hadn't been in the spring, if there was any chance. We're reopening this as a possible criminal investigation, Chen went on, which means we'll be questioning everyone connected to this area. Park employees, regular hikers, anyone who might have been here that day. It's a long shot after so much time, but if your son was separated from your wife before she died, someone might have seen something as they walked back toward the start of the trail. Mark took one last look at Morning Glory Pool. Its deceptive beauty had hidden his wife's fate for 6 years. But it hadn't taken his son. Somewhere in these mountains, there might still be answers about what happened to Ethan. The question was whether those answers would bring hope, or just a different kind of sadness. The command center had been set up in the Cascade Trail parking area by dawn the next morning. Mark arrived to find dozens of search and rescue workers gathered around large maps spread across folding tables. The morning air was cool, smelling of pine and promising another hot July day. Detective Chen met him with a cup of coffee and a bright vest that said family. We're organizing grid searches based on possible routes your wife might have taken. Since we're now looking at this as a potential crime scene, we're also checking all buildings within a 5-mile radius. Buildings. Mark pulled on the vest. The coffee was bitter but welcome. Emergency shelters, maintenance sheds, old mining cabins. This area has dozens of buildings that hikers use during storms. If someone met your wife and son that day, they might have sent them to a shelter, especially if bad weather came in. Mark remembered Sarah talking about the shelter cabins during their hikes. The Park Service kept them for emergency use. Basic. Buildings with firewood, first aid supplies, and logbooks where hikers wrote down their stays. Sarah had always marked their locations on her maps as part of her thorough safety planning. A man in a park ranger uniform came up, his weathered face showing the permanent tan of someone who had spent decades outside. Detective Chen, I'm Ranger Tom Mitchell. I've pulled the maintenance logs for all the shelter cabins in this area from 6 years ago. He was probably in his early 50s, with the kind of solid, reassuring way about him that Mark associated with experienced outdoorsmen. His uniform was neat even though it was early, and his radio and gear were properly placed on his belt. This is Mark Brennan. Chen introduced them, the missing woman's husband. Mitchell's face changed to one of real sympathy. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Brennan. I've been working these trails for 15 years. Your wife. I remember her from the trail registers. She always signed in properly, noted her expected return time. The kind of hiker we wish everyone would be. You remember her? Mark felt a small bit of hope. It's hard to forget someone that consistent. She hiked here regularly, didn't she? Sometimes with you, often with the little one in the carrier. Mitchell took out a worn notebook. I went through my personal logs last night when Detective Chen called about the shelter. Checks. I was actually on duty that day, 6 years ago, July 15th. Chen leaned forward. You were? That wasn't in the original investigation files. Mitchell nodded. I was doing regular maintenance on the backcountry shelters. It's in the park records, but I guess no one thought to check my maintenance schedule. With the missing persons case back then, I was up at Timber Creek Shelter that morning, then worked my way down to Pine Ridge and Avalanche Creek in the afternoon. Those are all along possible routes from the main trail, Mark said, looking at the map. Did you see anything unusual? Any hikers in trouble? That's what I've been trying to remember. On July 15th, we had some unexpected weather move in that afternoon. Nothing bad, but enough rain to send hikers who weren't prepared looking for cover. I made sure all 3 shelters were stocked and secure. Mark's pulse quickened. Sarah hadn't been unprepared, but with a 2-year-old, she might have gone to a shelter even for light rain. Were the logbooks checked after my family disappeared? Mitchell and Chen looked at each other. That's actually not clear from the original case files, Chen admitted. The first search focused on the main trails and the idea of an accident. The shelter cabins were checked to see if anyone was in them, but I don't see any records of the logbooks being looked at. I have them, Mitchell said quietly. All the old logbooks. The Park Service wanted to throw them out during a renovation 2 years ago, but I kept them. I thought they were historical records worth saving. They're in storage at the ranger station. Chen immediately sent an officer to get the logbooks while she organized the search teams. Mark found himself in Mitchell's group, heading for the shelter cabins to do thorough searches with fresh eyes. As they hiked toward Timber Creek Shelter, Mitchell kept a steady pace even with the high elevation, pointing out trail features with the ease of someone who had known them for a long time. Your wife knew these trails well. She would have known exactly where each shelter was. She had them all marked on her maps, Mark confirmed, breathing harder than he liked. 6 years of sadness had made him less fit. She said it was important to always have a backup plan with a toddler. The Timber Creek Shelter appeared through the trees. It was a simple wooden building with a metal roof, maybe 12 by 16 feet. Mitchell took out a key and opened the heavy door, revealing a simple inside: wooden bunks, a small wood stove, and emergency supplies in metal containers. We'll dust for prints, check for any trace evidence, one of the CSI team members said. Starting to take pictures of the inside, though after 6 years. Mark stood in the doorway, imagining Sarah here with Ethan, waiting out a rainstorm, probably making it an adventure for their son. Ethan would have loved the newness of it. The camping house, as he called any small building. The thing about these shelters, Mitchell said next to him, is that they're supposed to be left unlocked for emergencies. But sometimes hikers accidentally lock them when they leave, or the lock gets stuck. I specifically remember checking all the locks that day because of the weather coming in. They moved on to Pine Ridge Shelter, a similar building but with a better view of the valley below. Again, the CSI team started their careful documentation while Mark tried to put himself in Sarah's shoes. Which way would she have gone with a tired toddler if bad weather was coming? Mr. Brennan, Mitchell said, looking at his notebook again. Your wife? Did she usually take different routes or stick to the trail she knew? She liked to explore, but she was careful with Ethan. She would check out new trails by herself first, then bring him if they were safe. Mark paused, remembering that she had mentioned wanting to show him the alpine meadow. It's past Morning Glory Pool, on the upper loop. Mitchell's face grew thoughtful. The upper loop. That would put her near Pine Ridge or Avalanche Creek. Shelters if bad weather came in. It's not Timber Creek. That's the opposite way. As they hiked toward Avalanche Creek Shelter, the last and most remote of the 3, Mark noticed Mitchell sometimes stopping to look at the trail. even after 6 years. The man clearly knew every root and rock, every change from season to season. "It must be strange," Mark said, "having such a tragedy happen in a place you know so well." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Every ranger deals with it at some point. Lost hikers, accidents, sometimes worse. But a mother and child just disappearing, that stays with you. I think about it every time I pass Morning Glory Pool. Such a beautiful place to hide something so terrible. The Avalanche Creek shelter sat in a small clearing, more by itself than the others. As Mitchell unlocked the door, Mark noticed this one had a newer lock. "I had to replace this one 4 years ago," Mitchell explained. "The old one kept getting stuck from the inside." The CSI team started their work, but something felt different about this shelter. Maybe it was the location, the way the forest was so close, or how the sound of the creek covered other noises. Mark could imagine someone feeling very alone here, very vulnerable. "If my wife came here with Ethan," Mark said slowly, "and someone else was already here or came after." "These shelters sleep 6 to 8 people," Mitchell said. "It's not unusual for strangers to share them during storms. Most hikers are good people." But he didn't finish the thought. As the search team spread out from the shelter, checking the forest around it, Mark stood by the creek that the shelter was named after. The water rushed by, cold from melted snow, not caring about human tragedy. Somewhere in these mountains, his son had been separated from his wife. Someone had seen something, done something, known something. The question was whether 6 years had buried those secrets as deeply as the hot spring had hidden. Sarah's fate. The search teams had been working for 3 hours when Detective Chen's radio crackled with urgent news. Mark was helping to document the area around Avalanche Creek shelter when he heard Chen's sharp gasp. "They found something at the ranger station," she told the group. "We need to go back right away." The hike back felt like it took forever, with Chen setting a hard pace that left Mark struggling to keep up. Mitchell stayed with him, sometimes offering a steady hand on the rougher parts of the trail. "What do you think they found?" Mark asked. "Between breaths. Could be anything," Mitchell replied, though his face had grown serious. "The station has employee areas that haven't been thoroughly searched before. If someone on the staff was involved, they came out of the trail to find." The ranger station parking lot turned into a crime scene. More police cars had arrived, and officers were setting up a perimeter around the building. Through the windows, Mark could see investigators moving inside. Detective Chen met them at the entrance. "We got a warrant to search employee lockers and common areas. We started with the current staff, then moved to the older, unassigned lockers from former employees." She led them inside, past the public area with its trail maps and educational signs, into the employee section Mark had never seen. A row of metal lockers lined one wall, several of them open with evidence markers placed nearby. Locker 47 hadn't been assigned in 4 years, Chen explained, stopping in front of a green metal door that was slightly open. The current station manager said it belonged to Jake Morrison, a seasonal worker who left suddenly in 2019. "When we cut the lock," Mark looked inside and felt his legs get weak. Evidence bags on a nearby table held a delicate silver necklace with a small compass charm Sarah's anniversary gift from him, which she wore on every hike. Next to it was another wedding ring, the white gold one with small diamonds she wore when not hiking, which she usually kept in her pack as a backup. "These are Sarah's," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The necklace, I gave it to her for our 5th anniversary. She said a compass would always help her find her way home." Chen nodded grimly. The items were hidden behind a fake panel in the back of the locker. Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide them. Jake Morrison. Mark repeated the name. "Who is he?" Mitchell had moved closer to look at the evidence without touching it. "I remembered Jake, a young guy, maybe in his mid-20s when he worked here. Quiet, kept to himself. He was good with trail maintenance, but not great with people. Did he look like? Mark demanded, trying to picture the man who might have killed his wife. Brown hair, average height, a bit of a loner, Mitchell recalled. He lived in employee housing for 2 seasons, then left without much warning. He said he got a job offer in Utah, but none of us heard from him again. Chen was already looking up records on her tablet. Jake Andrew Morrison, born April 3, 1994. He worked here in the summers of 2018 and 2019. No criminal record, but, she paused, scrolling through the data. He's been off the grid since he left here. No current address, no work records, no credit card activity. He's hiding, Mark said, staring at his wife's jewelry. He killed her, and he's been hiding for 6 years. We're putting out a bolo alert now, Chen assured him. Every agency in the country will be looking for him. Mr. Brennan, I need you to confirm these items. Are you certain they belong to your wife? Mark reached for the compass necklace, then stopped, remembering not to touch the evidence. The compass has an engraving on the back, our initials and the date. He swallowed hard. Sarah never hiked without it, said it was her good luck charm. Chen carefully turned the evidence bag to show the inscription. There it was, exactly as Mark remembered. M&S, always find your way home, 2015. If Jake Morrison took these as trophies. Chen didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood what she meant. But why leave them here? Mark asked. Why not take them when he ran away? Mitchell spoke up, thinking. The lockers are rarely checked. The management only cleans them out every few years when they need space. He probably thought they'd be safe here for a long time. Maybe he planned to come back for them someday. As crime scene technicians worked on the locker and the area around it, Mark found himself looking at the employee break room, which was visible through a doorway. It was such a normal space. A coffee maker, a refrigerator covered in safety notices, a table with different kinds of chairs. Had Jake Morrison sat there planning his crime? Had he come back from killing Sarah and calmly eaten lunch with his co-workers? Mr. Mitchell, Chen said to the ranger, we'll need a full statement about everything you remember about Morrison. Any interactions with the family, any strange behavior. Of course, Mitchell agreed easily, though I'll be honest. He was so quiet it's hard to remember much. He showed up, did his work, and went home. The kind of employee you barely notice. Something about that bothered Mark, though he couldn't quite figure out why. A park employee who worked these trails, who knew all the hidden spots and shelters, who could move through the wilderness without anyone noticing. It was the perfect profile for someone who could make a mother and child disappear. We need to search the employee housing, Mark said suddenly. Even if it's been years, there might be some trace. Already on it, Chen assured him. We've got teams heading to the old seasonal living quarters now. If Morrison left anything behind, we'll find it. Mitchell excused himself to go back to his maintenance work, promising to put together a full list of anything he could remember about Morrison. As he left, Mark noticed the ranger's slight limp, probably from years of hiking these rough trails. The man had been nothing but helpful, even staying late to help with the search. Outside, Mark stood in the parking lot, trying to understand. This new development, they had a name, a face to put to his nightmare. Jake Morrison, a young, quiet, forgettable man, had somehow met Sarah and Ethan on the trail. He had done something to separate them, killed Sarah, hidden her body in the hot spring, and kept her jewelry as trophies. But where was Ethan? If Morrison took my son, Mark said to Chen, who had followed him outside, where would he go? How do you hide a 2-year-old for 6 years? That's what we're going to find out, Chen replied firmly. The fact that he kept trophies suggests a certain kind of psychology. He wanted reminders. If he took Ethan, she didn't finish. But Mark understood. If Morrison had kept Sarah's jewelry, There was a chance, however small, that he had kept Ethan, too. Somewhere, Jake Morrison might be raising Mark's son as his own. The compass necklace flashed in Mark's mind. Sarah's good luck charm meant to always guide her home. Instead, it had been locked away in the dark for years, a killer's trophy. But now it might be the key to finding their son. "I want to see everything about Morrison," Mark said. "Work records, background check, any photos you can find. This man has my son. I need to know everything about him." Chen nodded. "We're pulling it all together now. Why don't you get some rest at the hotel? This is going to be a long investigation." But Mark knew rest was impossible. Not when they finally had a lead, finally had a name. Jake Morrison had made one mistake, keeping those trophies where they could eventually be found. Now Mark just had to hope the man had made others, enough to lead them to Ethan before another. 6 years passed. Mark's house felt emptier than ever as he walked through the door at 9 p.m. Tired from the flight back to Denver, Detective Chen had insisted he go home while they followed leads on Jake Morrison, promising to call as soon as they had any news. The familiar house only made him feel the absence of Sarah's voice calling from the kitchen or Ethan's toys all over the living room floor. He dropped his bag by the door and went to his home office, turning on his laptop. If he couldn't be in Colorado helping with the search, at least he could do some research. A search for Jake Morrison's name gave him very little online. No social media, no recent addresses. Just a few work verification records that ended in 2019. Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Chen. "Teams checking Morrison's last known contacts in Utah will update in the morning." He put the phone down and took out his notebook from the trip, going over everything they had learned. Sarah's jewelry in Morrison's locker, the young man's sudden departure, the way he had seemingly disappeared without a trace, possibly taking Ethan with him. But something bothered Mark as he looked at his notes from the shelter searches. He'd written down Mitchell's comment about the Avalanche Creek shelter lock being replaced 4 years ago because it kept getting stuck. That would have been in 2020, after Morrison had already left. Yet Mitchell had known the exact year without checking any records. Mark shook his head. He was overthinking things, seeing suspicious details where there were none. Mitchell was in charge of maintenance for all the shelters. Of course, he would remember when locks were replaced. Still, other small details came to mind as he reviewed the day. The way Mitchell had stayed close during the whole search, always close enough to hear police communications. How he had volunteered right away to help, putting himself in the middle of the investigation. His detailed memory of Morrison, even though he said the man was forgettable. And there was something else. Something Mitchell had said at the shelter that bothered Mark. What was it? He closed his eyes, trying to remember the exact words. "I think about it every time I pass Morning Glory Pool. Such a beautiful place to hide something so terrible. Hide something terrible, not for something terrible to happen or where something terrible occurred. Hide as if it was done. On purpose, planned." Mark picked up his phone and scrolled to Detective Chen's number. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the call button. What was he going to say? That the helpful ranger who had spent his whole day helping them had used. A slightly strange choice of words. But the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. He made the call. "Chen here, Detective, it's Mark Brennan. I know this might sound paranoid, but I've been thinking about Ranger Mitchell." What about him? Just small things. The way he said certain things, how he knew specific details without checking records. He's been very helpful, maybe too helpful. Chen was quiet for a moment. It's not unusual for local officials to get involved in investigations, especially in small towns. But I'll make a note to look into his background more thoroughly. Did he do or say anything specifically concerning? No, nothing real. I'm probably just grasping at straws because we're focused on Morrison. Grief and stress can make us see patterns that aren't there. Chen said gently. "But I've learned to trust the instincts of family members. I'll have someone quietly check where Mitchell was on July 15th, 6 years ago, just to be sure." After hanging up, Mark felt both foolish and relieved. It was probably making up suspicion where there was none, but at least Chen would check. He went to the kitchen to make coffee, knowing sleep would be hard to find even though he was tired. His laptop made a sound for a new email. The sender was T. Mitchell. The subject was information about Jake Morrison you should see. Mark's pulse quickened. How did Mitchell have his email address? Then he remembered they had exchanged contact information during the search in case anyone remembered more details. The email was short. "Mr. Brennan, I've been going through old employee files and found some concerning things about Morrison. I think Detective Chen should see them right away. I'm back in Denver tonight for a meeting tomorrow. Can I stop by for a little bit? I have work logs that show Morrison's assignments the week your family disappeared. Tom Mitchell." Mark stared at the screen. Mitchell was offering to bring evidence about Morrison directly to his house at night. Every instinct told him something was wrong. But what if the ranger really had found something important? What if this was the break they needed to find Ethan? He could call Chen back, ask her to be there, but that seemed overly paranoid for someone who had been nothing but helpful. Mitchell was a law enforcement officer himself, a respected ranger with 15 years of service. Mark was letting tiredness and desperation affect his judgment. He typed back, "I'll be up. There's coffee on if you want some." A while later, headlights swept across his living room windows. Mark watched through the blinds as Mitchell's Park Service truck pulled into his driveway. The ranger got out carrying a manila folder and what looked like a small evidence box. Mark opened the door before Mitchell could knock. "Thanks for making the drive. Come in." Mitchell came in with the easy confidence of someone who is comfortable in any situation. "I hope I'm not intruding. I know it's late, but I thought you'd want to see this right away. Can I get you that coffee?" Mark offered, leading him to the kitchen. "That would be great. It's been a long day." Mitchell put his things on the kitchen table and sat down, looking around with interest. Nice place. Very homey. Mark poured 2 mugs his back to Mitchell as he added sugar to his own. Behind him, he heard papers rustling as the ranger opened his folder. "So, I checked Morrison's work assignments with the trail logs from that week," Mitchell began. "He was scheduled for maintenance on the Upper Loop Trail the day your family disappeared. That would put him right near Morning Glory Pool." Mark turned with the coffee mugs. Noticing Mitchell had spread several official-looking documents on the table: work schedules, assignment logs, timesheets. It all looked real. Strong evidence against Morrison. "This is incredible," Mark said, putting Mitchell's mug in front of him and sitting down with his own. "How did Morrison's assignments not come up in the first investigation?" "Bureaucratic mix-up," Mitchell said, taking a sip of coffee. "Different departments, different filing systems, things get lost." He took out another paper. "Case. The really interesting part. Morrison asked for that specific assignment. He traded shifts with another worker to be on that trail that day." Mark leaned forward to look at the document, his coffee mug warm between his hands. The information was very convincing, making Morrison look like a predator who had planned his crime. He took a long drink of coffee, feeling the caffeine hit. His tired body. "We need to get this to Detective Chen right away," Mark said, reaching for his phone. But his hand felt strangely heavy, his movements slow. The kitchen seemed to tilt a little. Mitchell kept talking, his voice steady and calm. "You know, the thing about Morrison is he was always too obvious, too convenient. The quiet loner, the sudden departure. Real life isn't usually that neat." Mark tried to focus on Mitchell's face, but his vision was getting blurry. The coffee mug slipped from his numb fingers and brown liquid spread across the papers. Did you? I'm truly sorry about this, Mark." Mitchell's voice sounded far away, even though he was right across the table. "You just had to mention your concerns to the detective, didn't you? I saw her making notes about checking my background. I couldn't have that." The room spun violently. Mark tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He fell sideways, barely aware of Mitchell getting up from his chair and moving around the table with a slow, deliberate purpose. "Don't fight it," Mitchell said gently, catching Mark before he hit the floor. "It's just a sedative. We have a drive ahead of us, and I need you to be compliant. You're going to see your son again." "Mark? Isn't that what you wanted, Ethan?" Through the fog of whatever Mitchell had given him, that name broke through. His son was alive. Mitchell knew where he was. Mark tried to speak, to demand answers, but his mouth wouldn't make the words. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was Mitchell's weathered face looking down at him with something that almost looked like regret. Waking up was slow, like coming up from deep water. Mark's head was throbbing. His mouth felt like it was full of cotton. And for a few confusing moments, he couldn't remember where he was. The surface under him was hard and cold. A wooden floor, not his bed. His wrists were tied behind his back, with what felt like zip ties, and his ankles were tied in the same way. The memories came flooding back. Mitchell in his kitchen, the drugged coffee, the terrifying promise about seeing Ethan. Mark forced his eyes open, blinking against the dim light coming through dirty windows. He was in a cabin, not one of the park's emergency shelters, but something older, more remote. The walls were made of rough logs, with the gaps filled with concrete. A wood stove sat cold in one corner. The single room smelled of dust and something else. Something that made his stomach turn. Old food, unwashed bodies. The smell of people living there for a long time. "Ah, you're awake." Mitchell's voice came from near the door. The ranger was sitting in a wooden chair, still in his uniform, looking as calm as if they were sharing coffee at the station. The sedative was carefully measured. "You've been out for about 3 hours. Where are we?" Mark's voice came out scratchy. "My grandfather's old hunting cabin about 15 miles from any trail, completely off the grid. I've been meaning to sell it for years, but it's proven to be useful." Mitchell stood up and moved to check Mark's ties with professional skill. "Can't have you getting loose. Not yet." "You killed Sarah. It wasn't a question." Mitchell's face tightened. "That wasn't supposed to happen. None of it was supposed to happen the way it did." He moved to the window, looking out at the dark forest. "My wife, Rebecca, and I had been trying for children for 5 years. 3 miscarriages. The last one, just a month before that July, nearly killed her. The depression afterward, she tried to kill herself twice. Mark tested his ties, but they wouldn't give. So you stole mine? I didn't plan it." Mitchell turned back, his face almost begging for understanding. "That morning, I was checking the shelters like I told you. The weather turned bad, an unexpected storm. I was at Avalanche Creek Shelter when your wife came running in with Ethan. She was scared. The lightning was close. She asked if they could wait it out with me." The ranger began to pace, lost in the memory. Ethan was perfect. 2 years old, with those blonde curls, calling me Mr. Ranger in that sweet voice. He played with my radio, pretended to call for backup. Sarah was laughing, said he loved anything with buttons. So trusting, both of them. "You sick bastard." Mark growled. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone." Mitchell's voice rose. "But then Sarah mentioned you were homesick, that no one knew exactly where they were hiking. The storm got worse. She decided to stay the night rather than risk hiking with Ethan in that weather, with no cell signal to let you know." Mark's heart pounded as he put together his wife's final hours. Seeking safety in the storm, trusting the park ranger, making the smart choice to protect their son. "I called Rebecca on the satellite phone," Mitchell went on. "I told her about This beautiful little boy who needed a home, whose mother couldn't take care of him properly, letting him hike in dangerous weather. Rebecca was so excited. For the first time in months, she sounded alive again. Sarah was an excellent mother. Mark spat. Maybe. But in that moment, all I could think about was giving Rebecca hope. Mitchell's hands clenched and unclenched. After Ethan fell asleep, I tried to convince Sarah to let us adopt him. I told her about our struggles, our losses. She was sympathetic, but of course she said no. That's when He didn't finish. But Mark could fill in the blanks. In that remote shelter, with no witnesses except a sleeping toddler, Mitchell had made his choice. I used a sleeper hold. She didn't suffer. Mitchell's voice had gone flat. Then I had to figure out what to do. I wrapped her body in a tarp from the shelter supplies, put rocks in with her, and carried her to Morning Glory Pool before dawn. The hot springs would destroy any evidence, I thought. I took her jewelry as proof she was gone, and planned to plant it on someone eventually. Morrison, Mark said. Poor Jake. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong personality. The perfect person, to blame when needed. Mitchell actually smiled. I kept those items for years, waiting for the right moment. When they found Sarah's remains, I knew it was time to shift the suspicion. Where's my son? Mark demanded. Mitchell checked his watch. Rebecca will be bringing him soon, and the supplies will need to deal with you. She's known the truth. From the beginning, she helped me create the adoption story, dye his hair, keep him hidden those first months. She's been a wonderful mother to him these 6 years. His name is Ethan, not whatever you've been calling him. Owen. We call him Owen Mitchell. The ranger's voice softened. He's happy. Mark, a good student, loves soccer. He wants to be a park ranger like his dad. He doesn't remember you or Sarah. As far as he knows, Rebecca and I are his whole world. The sound of a car approaching made Mitchell move to the window. Headlights swept across the trees. Right on time. Now you're going to stay calm and quiet. Rebecca's bringing the supplies. Tarp, lye, shovels. Owen's in the car. We told him we're checking on the old cabin, maybe staying the night. Any sound from you, and we'll have to traumatize the boy by letting him see things no child should see. Mark heard car doors' voices, a woman's pleasant voice, and then his heart nearly stopped. A young boy's voice, deeper than he remembered, but clearly Ethan's. His son was just outside, alive, within reach, but impossibly far away. The cabin door opened. A woman came in first, in her mid-40s, with graying hair and cold eyes that took in the situation with a practiced calm. She was carrying a large duffel bag that made ominous clinking sounds. Is he secure? She asked Mitchell, her voice businesslike. Tight as can be. Where's Owen? In the truck with his iPad. I told him we'd be a few minutes checking for mice. Rebecca put the bag down and unzipped it to show a folded blue tarp, bottles of chemicals, and other supplies. We should have done this years ago, when he started asking questions about the other woman. Mark's blood ran cold. They had done this before. Through the dirty window, Mark could see the truck parked outside, a small figure lit up by the interior light. He was 8 years old now, focused on whatever was playing on his screen. Even from this distance, even with the dyed hair, Mark knew it was his son. Smart thinking with the iPad, Mitchell said. How long will that keep him busy? I downloaded a new game before we left. It should give us at least an hour. Rebecca pulled on latex gloves with a disturbing efficiency. Where are we taking him? There's an old mine shaft about 3 miles north, a 100-foot drop, and it floods in the spring. By the time anyone finds anything, there won't be much left. You killed others? Mark choked out. Rebecca laughed. A cold sound, just one. A hiker who saw too much 5 years ago recognized Owen from an old missing poster at a gas station. Tom's not the only one who will protect our family. We're a team, Mitchell said, moving to help his wife prepare the tarp. Partners in everything. When I brought Ethan home that night and told her what happened, she didn't hesitate. She said we'd been given a gift, and we'd do whatever it took to keep him. Mark tested his bonds desperately. His son was just outside playing games, not knowing. His parents were getting ready to murder his real father. The same people who had killed his mother were about to make him a complete orphan. Please, Mark tried. You have what you wanted. You have Ethan. Just let me go. I'll disappear. Never contact you again. You already told that detective you were suspicious of Tom? Rebecca cut him off. No, Mr. Brennan. You should have left the past buried like your wife. A sound outside made them all freeze. Car doors slamming, multiple cars. Rebecca rushed to the window. Someone's coming. It looks like. Her face turned pale. Police. Multiple units. Mitchell grabbed his rifle from the cabinet. How did they find us? Through the window, Mark saw officers taking positions, and his heart leaped, then plummeted as he saw Owen getting out of the truck, confused by the sudden activity. The boy stood frozen between the cabin and the police cars, his iPad dropping from his hands. Owen, Rebecca shouted. Get back in the truck. But the boy just stood there, caught in the developing chaos as police loudspeakers crackled to life and his parents. Prepared for a fight that would shatter his world completely. Tom. Mitchell. Detective Chen's voice boomed through a megaphone. This is the police. We have the cabin surrounded. Send out Mark, Brennan, and the boy. Then come out with your hands visible. How? Rebecca hissed, holding the chemical bottles. We were careful. Mitchell looked through the window, rifle in hand. Brennan's phone. They must have tracked it. Here, or his car at the house. Chen knew he suspected me. Mark felt a surge of hope. Chen had taken his concerns seriously. After all, had been monitoring him. When he had gone silent after Mitchell's visit, she had acted. Mom, Dad. Owen's voice came from outside, high and scared. What's happening? Get him back in the truck, Mitchell ordered. But Rebecca was already moving to the door. Owen, honey, get in the truck right now, she called out, trying to keep her voice calm. Lock the doors and stay down. Through the window, Mark could see his son's small figure running back to the vehicle, clearly terrified. Police officers held their positions, not wanting to scare the child further. We can still get out of this, Mitchell said, his ranger training taking over. The old logging road out back. If we can reach the truck, with cops everywhere. Rebecca's composure was breaking. Tom, we're surrounded. Then we negotiate. We have Brennan as a hostage. Mark laughed bitterly from the floor. Negotiate. You murdered my wife. You kidnapped my son. You killed another hiker. What exactly do you think you can negotiate? Shut up. Rebecca kicked him hard in the ribs. This is your fault. If you had just left things alone, if I'd left my son with his mother's killers. Mark spat blood. Never. Mitchell was checking. His ammunition, his movements quick and professional. They don't know about Stevens. That hiker's death was ruled an accident. If we can. The phone in Mitchell's pocket rang. He looked at the screen. Chen's number. Answer it, Rebecca urged. See what they want? Mitchell put it on speaker. Detective? Tom, this doesn't have to end badly. Chen's voice was calm but firm. Send out Mr. Brennan. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Mitchell replied. You've made assumptions based on the paranoid delusions of a grieving father. We have evidence, Tom. Sarah Brennan's jewelry with your fingerprints, not Morrison's. Security footage of you accessing that locker multiple times over the years. Your cabin rental records showing you were here. not at the shelters, the morning of July 15th, 6 years ago. Rebecca and Mitchell exchanged looks. Mark saw the moment they realized the walls were closing in. "What do you want?" Mitchell asked. "Send out Brennan and the boy. Then you and Rebecca come out with your hands visible." "It's over, Tom. Don't make this worse." "Worse." Mitchell laughed harshly. "You want to take our son? He's not your son," Chen said firmly. "He's Ethan Brennan, and he deserves to know the truth." Rebecca grabbed the phone. "That boy doesn't even remember his birth. Parents were the only family he knows. You want to destroy his life?" "You destroyed his life when you murdered his mother," Chen responded. "Rebecca, I know you're scared, but think about Owen. Ethan, do you want his last memory of you to be a shootout? Let him remember the good times, not this." Mark watched. Rebecca's face twisted with anger and sadness. For 6 years, she had been living her dream, a happy family, a loving son. Now it was all falling apart. There were no good times. Mark shouted toward the phone. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every bedtime story was built on my wife's murder. You're not his parents. You're the monsters who killed his real mother." Mitchell raised the rifle toward Mark. "One more word." An LED spotlight suddenly shone through the window, blinding them. In that moment of confusion, they heard the truck door opening outside. "No!" Rebecca screamed. "Owen, stay in the truck!" But through the chaos, Mark heard his son's voice. "Closer now. Mom, Dad, I'm scared." The policeman said to come to him. "Get back," Mitchell roared, turning toward the door. Everything happened at once. Rebecca lunged for the door to get to Owen. Mitchell, blinded by the spotlight, swung his rifle wildly. Mark rolled hard to his left, using his tied-up body to trip Rebecca, who crashed into Mitchell. The rifle fired, the sound deafening in the small cabin. Wood splinters exploded from the doorframe. Outside, officers shouted commands, and Owen screamed, a sound that tore through Mark's heart. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" Someone yelled outside. Mitchell struggled to get his balance back, but tear gas canisters crashed through the windows. Smoke filled the cabin instantly, choking and blinding them. Mark squeezed his eyes shut and held his breath, feeling Rebecca stumbling over him as she tried to reach the door. "Owen!" She screamed through the gas. "My baby!" Strong hands grabbed Mark, dragging him toward fresh air. He gasped as cool night air hit his lungs, blinking through tears to see tactical officers swarming the cabin. Mitchell and Rebecca were being forced to the ground, officers holding them down as they struggled and screamed for their son. "Ethan's safe," Chen said, appearing beside Mark as medics cut his ties. "We got him to the ambulance. He's terrified, but not hurt." Mark's arms screamed as blood started to flow back, but he forced himself to stand up. "I need to see him. Soon. Let the medics, now." Mark pushed past her, stumbling toward the ambulance where he could see a small figure wrapped in a scrate. A lock-scracked, wrapped in a blanket. His son was sitting on the ambulance bumper, a female officer kneeling beside him, speaking softly. The boy's face was streaked with tears, and his whole body was shaking. When he saw Mark coming, he pulled back. "That's him," Owen whispered. To the officer, "That's the man they had tied up. Is he a bad person?" Mark stopped a few feet away, his heart breaking. Behind him, he could hear Mitchell and Rebecca being read their rights, still shouting about their son, their family, their rights. But all Mark could see was the terrified 8-year-old who didn't know him at all. "No, sweetheart," the officer told Owen gently. "He's not bad. In fact, he's been looking for you for a very long time." "Looking for me?" Confusion mixed with fear in those familiar eyes. "Why?" Mark knelt down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Because I love you," he said simply. "And I've missed you every single day." Owen, Ethan stared at him, then looked back toward where his parents were being put into police cars. The boy's world was falling apart. Everything he had believed was ripping apart. Mark wanted nothing more than to hold him in his arms, but he stayed still, letting his son process this impossible moment. "They said you were bad," the boy whispered. "They said—" "I know," Mark said gently. "They told you a lot of things that weren't true, and that's going to be really hard to understand. But I promise you, we'll figure it out together. When you're ready." The night was filled with sirens, radio chatter, and officers working at the scene. But in that moment, there was only Mark and his son, separated by 3 feet and 6 years of lies, beginning the long journey back to the truth. "The Mitchells are being processed at the county jail," Chen told him. "Both are being charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy." Tom broke down completely during booking, but Rebecca is still saying they did nothing wrong, that they saved Ethan from neglectful parents. "She's delusional," Mark said flatly. Chen looked at her notes. "Mitchell's confession matches what he told you at the cabin. He killed your wife at the shelter, but Rebecca was fully involved from the moment he brought Ethan home. She helped dye his hair, created the adoption cover story, and kept him hidden. When that hiker recognized Ethan 5 years ago, Rebecca was the one who pushed him off the cliff while Tom created an alibi somewhere else. But how did Sarah end up in Morning Glory Pool?" Mitchell went back 3 nights later during his regular patrol. He needed a place where the body would never be found, or if it was, wouldn't have any usable evidence. He knew the hot springs would destroy DNA, fingerprints, everything. Morning Glory was perfect, deep and isolated. The mineral content would break down organic matter quickly. Mark felt sick, imagining Mitchell going back to move Sarah's body, figuring out the best place to hide his crime while Mark was frantically searching for his family. "The fake adoption papers were Rebecca's work," Chen went on. "She had a cousin who worked in family services years ago and learned enough about the system to create believable papers. They told their neighbors they had adopted through a private arrangement. After 1 year, when the searches died down and his hair had been thoroughly dyed, they started introducing Owen as their son. They planned all of it together," Mark said, feeling sick. "The really disturbing part is they seem to think they were good parents. Both keep insisting they gave Ethan a better life than he would have had. The psychological evaluations are going to be interesting. So, what happens now? Supervised visits to start, play therapy to help him understand the truth at his own pace. Eventually, if things go well, a gradual move into your life. But Mr. Brennan, you need to prepare yourself. He may never fully remember his early years with you and Sarah." Through the observation window, Mark could see his son with a social worker and Dr. Martinez. Ethan was sitting hunched in a chair, his arms wrapped around himself, looking completely lost. The 2 people he had trusted completely were in jail. For murder, his whole world was a lie. "Can I see him?" Mark asked. Dr. Martinez hesitated for a moment. "He's been asking about the Mitchells, wanting to know if they're okay. He's not ready to accept you as his father, but seeing you might help him understand you're not the enemy they made you out to be." Mark went into the room slowly. Ethan looked up with those painfully familiar eyes and pressed closer to the social worker. "Hi," Mark said softly, sitting in a chair across from them. "I know you're scared and confused. I just wanted you to know that I've been looking for you for a very long time, and whenever you're ready, if you want to talk or ask questions, I'll be here." Ethan studied him for a long moment. "The policeman said, 'You're my real dad.'" "Yes, and my mom and dad. They killed someone." The pain in his voice was devastating. "It's very complicated," Mark said carefully. "The doctors are going to help us understand everything together, okay? What matters right now is that you're safe." "But I love them," Ethan whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. They read me stories and took me camping and made me pancakes on Saturdays. How can they be bad people if they loved me? Mark watched his son's small shoulders shake with sobs. He had no easy answers, only a long, hard road ahead. He nodded slightly, then turned to the social worker. It was a dismissal, but Mark would take what he could get. His son was alive, traumatized, confused, but alive. Everything else could be worked through with time. As he left the room, Mark thought about Sarah, how she would have handled this with so much more grace, so much more wisdom. But she wasn't here, murdered by a desperate man who had stolen their son. "He'll need you to be patient," Dr. Martinez said quietly beside him. "To let him grieve the only life he's known, even as you're grieving the years you lost. It's not the reunion you dreamed of, but it's a beginning." Mark nodded, watching through the window as his son Nathan, no matter what name he answered, too slowly began to process his shattered world. It would be a long journey back to each other. But after 6 years of emptiness, Mark finally had hope.